got a super exciting panel discussion today on the topic, creating the case to stay the role of talent management in response to the Great Resignation. Before we get started and introduce the panelists and the moderators for today, wanted to share a little bit about the Chicagoland New Talent Management Network, just so you have context for what we're all about. So the Chicagoland Talent Management Network is a little bit of a misnomer because we've sort of expanded over the last couple months. And today, in fact, we have a panelist from Harley-Davidson in Milwaukee. So we welcome the surrounding communities. We have folks from Milwaukee on the phone. I actually believe we might even have somebody as far as Indonesia on this call. So when you put things out on the internet that look interesting, lots of people want to join. So we certainly welcome everybody. A few guiding principles about the network. Membership is free. So we're a very low budget operation, as in we have no budget. We really are focused on having great conversations, and we believe that you shouldn't have to pay to join a network to exchange great ideas. The operating expenses and things like hosting Zooms and meetings eventually when someday we're in person are covered by members. We're open to both corporate consulting and search professionals, but ideally we want a ratio of about 3-to-1. So we want these conversations to happen among practitioners. And really importantly, these exchanges and the network is not meant to be commercial. So this is meant to be focused on issues that folks are experiencing on their jobs and sharing ideas and learnings about how to address them. We want to do a couple of things really well, versus being a network or a group that caters to everybody. So we're really focused on issues that are affecting chief people officers, VPs of talent, organizations that are trying to get that talent equation right. In terms of how the networks run, we have an advisory board of about 5 to 7 talent management professionals. I'll share that board in a bit. One of the things that we've decided to do as a board to keep this network thriving and healthy and continuing to move forward is that the advisory board members will serve for 12 months, and they will identify their successors who will replace them at the end of 12 months. In terms of governance, we make decisions by consensus. And Mark Efron, who runs the national organization of the Talent Management Network, he provides support and guidance and sort of has the overarching brand. So just wanted to share that. Our mission, as you can see here, Chicago Talent Management Network is a city group that helps senior talent management leaders in the Chicagoland, I would say greater Chicagoland area, learn, grow, and succeed through peer-to-peer networking, knowledge sharing among like-minded leaders and professionals. So again, really what we want to do is have great conversations on those thorny issues that all of us are wrestling with today. In terms of our measures of success, we're targeting about 75 to 100 senior talent management leaders that are active in this network. We want to aim for multiple well-attended events each year. So our goal is to have about one every quarter. We had one in August that was quite successful as well on DE&I. And we want members to report meaningful, practical value and improve professional effectiveness as a result of their participation in this group. Briefly, the advisory board members for the last 12 months, and this advisory board will serve through probably the summer of next year, I think is what we identified. So we have Jeff Balzano, who is the head of talent management for Morningstar. We have Chris Mason, who's the head of talent and total rewards for KE. We got Debbie Plager, who's the chief talent officer for Hub International. We have Lindsay Hayes, who's the vice president of talent management and development at IDEX. Aaron Henry, who's a leadership advisory consultant for Spencer Stewart. And my name is Aaron Sorensen. I run the business transformation and behavioral science practice at Axiom Consulting Partners. So welcome you here today. In terms of our all-star panelists on this exciting topic, I'm not going to go into deep on the introductions. I'm going to ask each panelist to share a little bit about themselves and the issues. Actually, Debbie will, as our moderator for this first session. But just briefly, we got Holly Foraker, the VP of Global Talent Management at CDK Global in the Western suburbs. We got Debbie Plager, the Chief Talent Officer at Hub International. And Debbie's going to have an exciting role. She's going to serve as both the moderator of our first full group discussion And then she's going to put herself in the role of a panelist in the breakout rooms that will facilitate as well. Excited to have Mary Slaughter, who's the global head of employee experience at Morningstar, and Kristen Strunk, who's the director of talent and employee experience at Harley-Davidson Motor Company. So super excited about the mix of different types of businesses. They're going to tell you a little bit more about their organizations, their roles, and how talent management is set up, and how they're addressing these issues with the Great Resignation. One other really important individual that I'm going to share, who you'll hear him facilitating in one of the breakout groups, is Chris Mason. And Chris is as I mentioned earlier, he's the head of rewards and talent at KE. So he'll be the other moderator. So with that said, Debbie, I'm going to hand it over to you for facilitating our first discussion. But why don't, before you do that, just share a little bit about your organization, your role, how you guys are set up, and how does this issue show up for Hub International?
Absolutely. It is so wonderful to actually see you all, whether I see your little photo or your name, and just to be together. As Erin said, we really weren't sure, but we're talent professionals. We're used to pivoting. So we were ready to go. We were ready to pause. So it's lovely to see you. Debbie Plager and Hub International, we're the 5th largest insurance broker, but a lot of folks haven't heard of us because we really service small and mid-market. Our footprint is across Canada and the United States and Puerto Rico. So we actually have branches above the Arctic Circle. We have branches in Puerto Rico, in Montreal, and LA. So it is really fascinating as we think about this challenge about the Great Resignation, or folks that know me know I'm an optimist. I might think about the Great Attraction. How do we reframe this, and how do we think about this? So Hub is a very decentralized. Erin knows Hub well, right? We grew a lot by acquisition, and a lot of entrepreneurs that are now leading, part of one giant company. HR functions are decentralized. I'm part of the core HR, and we were really here to work and support the field. So how it affects Hub, I think, is interesting. I would say we're not actually in our main core line of business experiencing the Great Resignation. I think what we're experiencing is challenges with growth because we're in a sector that just doesn't have a lot of talent that's entering. So we've been challenged with this. But as far as when we're looking at our data, which panelists is going to be one of the questions I ask you, like, let's actually ground what we're doing in data. Now, that said, we have corporate functions, right? Like HR, finance, IT. And that is, I think we are feeling more of the resignation sort of pull there in terms of turnover. But again, when we look at our data compared to 2019, it's not as challenging. My accountability is for everything from the candidate experience through the employee experience and beyond. So I hear very different challenges depending on if I'm talking with recruiters or if I'm talking with talent development and talking with people on how do we get people to stay. Also wanted to share, because I did ask the panelists this, in addition to a little bit of the professional, I am a novice pandemic gardener. So that has been where I have really spent my time, and my husband would say there's Farmer Debbie in the field. So if I got really stressed, I would be weeding. So I'm not necessarily great at it, but that's a little bit about me. So as Erin said, we've got about 30 minutes or so is a large group before we break out into 2 smaller groups. And I am joined by Holly Forker, Mary Slaughter, and Kristen Strunk. So what I'd ask is each of them to share a little bit about your company, your role, and why is this topic timely for you? Like, why did you bother to show up? Because you could be anywhere and you're here. So Holly, how about you?
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. My name is Holly Foraker, VP of Talent at CDK Global. We're based out of Hoffman Estates. I've been with the organization about 3 years, and I've got responsibility for talent acquisition, talent management, learning and leadership development, inclusion and diversity, and corporate responsibility. So it's been an exciting year across all of those fronts. Of course, really interested in this topic, so really happy to be here today. CDK Global is about $2 billion organization that delivers integrated tech solutions to the automotive industry and the OEMs. So we connect the OEMs, the dealers, and really help them to drive healthy dealership businesses easiest way to think about it is when you go to purchase a car, from the minute that you log in and look at a car online and say, what dealer close to me has it in this color with this interior, everything from that point forward to the time you're getting a message to say, hey, Debbie, it's time for you to come in and get your oil changed, is all run by CDK software. And we're the largest provider in the industry. My picked up hobby over the pandemic, I, like many people, and my husband went and bought an RV because we had a Disney cruise that was canceled, and got into, we've always been campers, but now we're glampers, I guess. And we've taken that thing across multiple states already and really enjoy it. So looking forward to summer again here. This topic, particular interest of mine right now, of course, across the integrated talent space, there's just so many things that this is touching. Particularly in talent acquisition, we're seeing it as a tech company. We have a large presence on the West Coast, and we're competing with the Salesforce, Cisco, Facebooks, Googles of the world. And so it feels like every week or so, we are challenged by something new coming out in a way of thinking. And really, I think there's a real movement happening here. We're talking about the Great Resignation as kind of a point in time, temporary state of the market. But what we're really seeing, particularly in the tech space and among some of the other segments of our talent, is kind of a permanent change in thinking around how people are placing value on where they work, how they work, what's important to them, what's maybe not as important. It's challenging us as talent practitioners to think about really what are the drivers to get people to engage in their work and find that flow in the workplace and want to continue to apply discretionary effort. So there's just so many areas that I think this is touching. We are feeling it. We're seeing the attrition spike. We're having the retention conversations day in and day out. And I'm just really excited to be in this space right now and be able to be on the forefront of helping our organizations to think differently about it and figure out what's next gen for us and what might the world look like in a few years and how we help enable it.
Holly, I love that. And I'm also thinking about like you and your RV. So if you're like going across the mountains and you get a message, you know, oh, it's my own company that probably is that software that's helping me get where I need to go. Love it. Yeah. And the movement, I think we'll come back to that too. Mary Slaughter. Mary, can you introduce yourself?
Happy to. Hi, good morning, everyone. Hope wherever you are, your network is alive and well for you. I was on a call earlier this morning before this one, and that's how it started, was everyone saying, my network is going, what's happening here? And people kept dropping and they kept coming back on their phones. So it's great to be with everyone. I'm actually not physically in Chicago or the Chicagoland area this morning. I live in Atlanta, but spend a lot of time in Chicago because Morningstar is headquartered in Chicago. My guess is many of you probably know us, but for those that don't, we're a firm that sits at sort of the intersection of financial services and technology and investing. We are all about the research and analysis of investment opportunities and options. And to some extent, where our goal in life is, we use the word empowering, but it's a bit of democratizing in investing to create the kind of transparency that all of us need to make smart investing decisions. For people that don't live in this space at all, my layperson description is, I said, think about sort of like consumer reports. It gives you guidance as to what to do. I'm sure our CEO would cringe at that because that is probably not nearly reflective of the sophistication of the work that we do. But for those of us that haven't grown up as an analyst, a quantitative analyst on top of that, it's probably a pretty useful description. Before I get to the meaty topic at hand, let me tell you what I did during the pandemic. So I'm not sure it's a hobby because I don't consider parenting a hobby, but it was a new twist of events. So I had a high school senior that graduated, in the middle of COVID and then started college all virtually from the bedroom, her bedroom upstairs for a full year. So part of my year, or part of the 18 months, was sort of spent trying to keep that person on the tracks, and have college somehow or other launch into a somewhat meaningful experience, which I will say was a stretch. She's much happier now that she's on campus. And then the other individual, my other daughter, is in the throes of all of the application process for college. So I feel like all my spare time was spent trying to either get someone into college or keep somebody in college over the course. And setting that aside, did lots of walking, lots of getting outside any chance I had the opportunity to do so. So just to keep my head sane. My role at Morningstar, as it says, I'm the head of employee experience. Interestingly, this is a relatively new role for us, and I will give our head of talent and culture, which is what we refer to instead of HR, our head of talent and culture and our CEO, both said to me, we don't know exactly how the employee experience is going to change, but it's going to. So we need to put someone proactively in that space that is thinking about that all the time, trying to stay ahead of it, push us to think of aspects that we haven't considered before. I think all of our colleagues would consider us a fairly employee-centric organization already, but to the point of why is this topic interesting to me, like many other things, the pandemic forced us all to experience the purity of work. So all of the other sort of fringes fell away, and many people found themselves day in and day out with just the work, itself, which people have definitely rethought their time, their relationship between employee and employer. I think there's also been a relatively significant power shift, might be the way to think of it, between employee and employer. And I think we're just having to redefine the value of the relationship. Because if we don't think about it proactively, it's not ours to tell an employee base that, but it is ours to embrace understanding what they want it to be and what we are willing to deliver. So I feel like our responsibility is to be reflective of that, make decisions about that, and be explicit and articulate that to our employee base so people can make informed decisions. So when they join up, they know what they're joining into, and they're satisfied and happy and motivated to be part of it. So we are in the middle of a lot of moving parts right now, which makes it a fun and exciting place to be. So good to be with you. Thank you, Debbie.
Love that. And Mary, I'm already seeing ties, right? Power shift. And Holly, you talking about a movement, right? And we as talent professionals are really at the epicenter of that. And, even Mary just this morning said, well, we're all here. Everybody that's on this call is here because we care about people and we care about each other. And so we are often that conduit of saying, what do employees need and voice, and what can we deliver to be genuine? Okay. And I just wanted to share, I'm having a fangirl moment. So I shared with Mary before, longtime fan of Mary and her time with NLI. And I shared, not only did I really enjoy what she shared, but you hosted some pivotal panels that really shifted and evolved my thinking as a talent practitioner. So it's just such a joy to be in the virtual room with you. Last but not least, Kristen, welcome. And please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm Kristen Strunk. I'm the head of talent and employee experience for Harley-Davidson. So what that means at HD is that I have responsibility for talent, the talent management process, change management, organizational development, as well as the compensation and total rewards and benefits. So that's kind of what my role exists as. And I think a lot of people here, the employee experience title is a little bit new for all of us, and we haven't really determined what that means exactly. One of my main responsibilities is in the space of what we're calling the future of work and the virtual mindset. In places where we do not have manufacturing locations, we are really not headed back to the office full time. It's a decision that our CEO made. So at the beginning of the pandemic, at the end of February of 2020, we got a new CEO. He brought this idea with him about 2 weeks before the shutdown. And In the middle of that, we have had, reorganizations and things of that nature. And so really, my role is also to help the organization think differently about how we work and really helping to build the talent in the organization that can support the virtual mindset in terms of how we stay connected, how we integrate things, how we leverage new tools and new learnings. Our first order of business was to get people through the pandemic. So that was a lot of leader support, a lot of employee support. And now we're shifting into the role of leaders in this new world and asynchronous communication and reducing the number of meetings and all of the different ways that we need to work. So with that being said, one of the things that we're really talking about is the fact that we actually need to work differently. And so I'm going to, kind of riff off of what everybody else has said about the great. And I'm really going to kind of look at it in terms of the great renegotiation or the great realignment, because we will not have the same number of people that we had before the pandemic. So not only did we lose globally a number of people due to the pandemic itself, we lost over 13 million people, 13 million women specifically in the workforce globally. We lost over 2 million in the US to early retirement. So when we start to talk about this for us, we're really talking about impacting the way that we get work done and the work that we're actually doing and what we're actually spending time on, because we know we will never fill all of the jobs that we currently have open. We will never fill the headcount that we have. So we're really trying to get leaders and employees to understand that prioritization, new ways of working, new uses for time are really, really important, and helping them understand that this is a renegotiation of the social contract that we have with work. We're really talking about flexibility. We're talking about, the hours worked, the asynchronous communication, all of those things around giving people autonomy and agency over what they're doing so that they have that additional freedom, which is so important at Harley-Davidson. So we're a global organization. So we have people in 14 countries around the world. So this has been difficult for us to kind of manage and keep on top of. For me, during the pandemic, I did not start a hobby. I did not make sourdough bread. I did not do any of that. It was really all I could do to get through a lot of the day in terms of, as Mary said, helping to care for others and keeping them on track. So it wasn't something that wasn't a time in my life where I picked up anything new. So I really applaud those of you who had the energy to do that. But I'm looking forward to the conversation here today.
Fantastic. So to my advisory board panelists, thank you for finding such provocative thinkers. And really, I'm loving this theme around renegotiation, power shift. It's a movement, right? And that we're at this moment in time, right? So I'm a former historian, so I'm seeing these trends come together. It's very exciting. I'll just kick it off to whoever is really wants to start. But so we're talking about a movement or power shift. What is your team, your talent team, doing differently? Like, where are you focused now? And are you seeing any early signs of success of these little test and learns or experiments, and how you're responding to what's happening in your workforce?
Yes, I'm happy to start. I mean, we're trying all sorts of things. So the nice thing about our culture and our organization and our values is, we're very entrepreneurial spirited. And I think that's playing to our advantage right now, because a lot of us are saying, well, what could we, could this work? Let's try it. Let's pilot it. Let's see. And there's a lot of appetite to do that. So even just thinking differently, like Kristen, you made a comment a minute ago about just the volumes of women leaving the workforce, right? Like that's a problem in and of itself as a segment of this. We're playing around with starting up some returnship programs and trying to be more intentional about how we bring women back into the workplace. As talent practitioners, I'm sure you all have had these conversations at some point, but I feel like we've got a really captive audience that we've really been able to dig into. What about those that are 70% ready for the next role? They're not ready today, but they're close enough. Let's really dig into what we know about them from a talent standpoint how we can support them differently. And let's not risk waiting another 12 months for them to be 100% ready to play the game. Let's put them in and let's talk about how we support somebody that's doing that. So those are a couple examples that I think, at smaller scale, we're starting to play with in different talent segments to say, how could this play out and how can we solve for some of these challenges? Like Kristen's point, we're not going to fill all of these recs in the same way, shape, or form than we did pre-pandemic. We've got to get creative around how we utilize our talent differently. And luckily, we've got a captive audience who is willing to try those things out with us and be supportive and lead the way with us. So it's exciting from that front.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll chime in. The word pilot is the first thing that jumps to mind for me. We are explicitly talking about launching and embracing pilots of all kinds of things in the sponsorship space, in the career development space, and in how we're doing recruiting, how we're capturing employee sentiment, and pretty comfortable with actually being explicit about that. As a firm, Morningstar is very keen on independence and transparency of information. We believe that's sort of central to our mission, but it's also central to how we operate internally. So we're finding that our colleagues want more transparency, more access, particularly in career development. So our broader talent and culture team spends a lot of time thinking about both internal movement as well as recruitment for those open job recs, which I'm sure we are all experiencing. But I think one of the big shifts that we are seeing is a much more purposeful effort, doubling down, tripling down perhaps on how we think about internal talent, how we think about career mobility, the intersections of that with diversity, equity, and inclusion, with leadership pipeline, development, with the experience that people have, and the sentiment that they develop because of that. So we are not only revisiting current programs, we're looking at new programs, new technologies, new platforms, and looking for ways to test those things to find the things that are the most meaningful to our colleagues.
And I would have to say that in our space, we are moving away from, I would say, the word pilot, and we're just doing. We are thinking in 90-day segments, really. So we have eliminated our formal performance management process and our formal development process and replaced that with 60 to 90-day conversations around priorities and development. And for us, what that looks like is a little bit more like the gig economy in terms of helping people move on to high impact projects, lending out your talent, trading talent, and not necessarily preparing people for specific roles. And the reason I say that is, as all of us, we've been in these roles for a number of years and have seen a lot of things. I have only had one succession plan actually turn out the way that we wanted it to, where 5 years ago I said this person is going to be president of a specific division, and we did the exact things that we planned, and that person ended up in that role as it existed. Roles are changing so fast. The structure of our organization is changing so fast. We're really focused on developing those skills in the people and making sure that they have the ability to, it's an overused word at the moment, whether it's agile or pivot or flexibility, but really be able to adapt to what's coming in our marketplace. And so for us, that focus on skill development and personal development that then turns into what do you want to do next? What do you want to learn next? And now how do we help you get that experience? That's where we're spending the majority of our time right now.
I'd just echo one more thing, Kristen, that you brought up, which it's totally real for us. Trying to find the intersection of not only thinking at a programmatic level, but solving a real-time problem. So there's way more appetite for test and learn if it's a problem that somebody is dealing with today, right now, then something sort of detached and in the future, and both are doable, right? But I think as HR professionals, we're being super challenged right now to have that level of agility, to get in, see what works, doesn't, give it a go, move quickly, make a decision, and enable the business to make decisions as well too.
Mary, if I can, I'm going to bridge to you, and then I'm going to go back to Kristen, because I was very thoughtfully reflecting on that. But I agree. Like, I think we all can say, right, this is the moment of HR, right? 2008 was the moment of the CFOs, and everyone's been saying 2020 and 21 is really the time of heads of people organizations. And it is, I think, about showing up as real business leaders, right? Who just, like, our expertise, we understand the business, and we understand, we bring expertise around people engagement and human capital. So your point, Mary, about, like, we're solving problems. And I think HR, as stock in HR, from my vantage point, and people I've talked to and worked with, is going up, because they see us as business professionals who are leading the way, actually, I think, in testing.
Buen día. Yo encuentro mi marbete.
Oh,
So,
if we can just, we can
Caporales 50.
Thanks. Okay. So I think that's very timely. Kristen, I think what I'm just in awe of, and just also reflecting on why is it different for me, because I think you're in manufacturing and you're hitting the future of work and automation and just changing, like, significant transformation a lot sooner than someone like myself that's sitting in a more established financial services, more insurance, right? So it's coming, but it's slower. So you're giving me a preview of sort of the future of work and what's to come. So I did want to just share a little bit, right? I mentioned, being part of brokerage in the insurance sector, we already were down 400,000 jobs, sort of pre-pandemic, right? We just have a lot of boomers that were retiring, and, what's the workforce? Because I don't know many 20 somethings that come in thinking insurance is sexy, right? So how do we come in, and how do we actually say, this is actually how you can learn and grow and be entrepreneurial and make a difference? So some of the things that we're experimenting with, I think that, like, everybody had, right? So we were a more traditional company around remote work, virtual work, obviously before March 2020. And we've now all proven the success in being able to work anywhere and get that done. So for Hub, what I'm excited about is it's actually allowing us to really do more testing around extended geographies for teams. So when we have people that were looking to move, how are they actually able to stay with their teams and be successful? And with that new muscle, one of the things that we're also starting to look at actually is retiree workforce. So people that do not want to come back full time, they're done, but are they happy to engage? Are they happy to lend their expertise? And hey, they can do it from anywhere, and they can be support and sort of built in. So we want to take advantage of this new opportunity, this new capability we have. There's a sense of urgency about managing workload, and it's allowing us to say, okay, then let's go over here and let's actually look at this untapped pool that beforehand would have been, oh, this won't work for so many reasons. And now it's, okay, we really want to try it. And the thing about Hub is, once one region tries it and there's success, there's a lot of competition that helps sort of move things forward. So that's a little bit of what's happening in our neck of the woods. I know we have about 10 minutes before we break into our panel, or sorry, our breakout rooms. Did want to ask a little bit about, like, this is the time, right? So we talked about the movement, we've talked about the power shift, we've talked about this. In some ways, I don't know that what you're sharing is that much different than what we've been wanting to do, but it seems like now people are listening. So I'm curious, how are you using your data, or how are you using the platform to sort of shift maybe the influence of your role?
Well, I think I can jump in really quickly here. What we're really focused on is meeting leaders where they are and speaking to their specific issues. So as you mentioned, we have a whole workforce that is manufacturing based, they're in plants. When we talk about virtual mindset, that's not something they can execute on. But when we talk to our 600 plus engineers, it's something that they've definitely had to pivot and shift to. And so I think, as you mentioned before, just understanding those different areas of the business and being prepared to understand the issue that each particular area is facing and understand what that means for the rest of the organization, and amplifying the fact of what we can accomplish if we are a distributed workforce. That has really been an underpinning for us as leaders get nervous maybe and try to start to pull people back into the office. We're really working hard to limit that. And so reinforcing the message about how much we can get done, the tools that we have that allowed us to, launch a full model year in the middle of a pandemic and those types of things. So that's really where we're spending the majority of our conversations.
For us, I mean, at our core, we're a deeply analytical firm to begin with. So it's perfectly fine to enter a meeting with a hypothesis that you proposed to a group of people, but you certainly will need the data to back it up. And so for us, it's something I've actually had to grow accustomed to. I'm still not fully there yet with Morningstar, but because I've been with the firm just a bit under a year. But when we talk about transparency, we really mean it. So, for example, with our employee base, they want to know not only the decisions that were made, but the process for how decisions were made. And so this sense of wanting to understand the data, wanting to know how did we reach a conclusion, it's not just for conference rooms and closed doors to talk about, it's to help our entire organization understand where we are going and why. I'm sure everybody on this webinar at some point had someone in their organization argue with them that it was all about productivity, that everybody had to be in the office to be productive. And then you found either in total or in pockets that assertion was just not true. That people were, I'm stepping outside of a physical manufacturing moment at the moment, but it's the pattern recognition that comes with data analytics. So I'll give you an example. For us to know when are we most at risk at losing someone, if you looked at the arc of their tenure, that's an important data point for us to know, because it helps us respond before those windows of time happen. Are people making assumptions that these are generational issues, that they have, people have preferences for where they work based on generation issues? We didn't find that. What we did find was that people who had parenting responsibilities might have had differing points of view. But that whole pattern recognition, to be able to come in and talk about what has been happening, what the reality actually is, to inform investment choices and decision making and where you prioritize your talent activity, has been super helpful for us.
What's really interesting about that, Mary, is, and I don't know if you're experiencing the same, but a lot of what we believe the data patterns were in a lot of these things are being questioned now, right? You made the correlation to engagement and where in the employee life cycle, typically have we been able to quantifiably, assess when somebody might be at higher risk to leave. So even changing the way I found internally with some of our conversations, where I'm hearing leaders say, well, let's, we do a weekly pulse survey. So we've got a really dynamic engagement tool that we have access to in real time. But even hearing leaders talk about, well, we've got to go find who's the most disengaged and step in there. That's not true right now entirely. Like, you have very engaged folks who are leaving because they're finding a different value system somewhere, right? Like, I think it's challenging us to think about the utilization of that data in different ways and question even some of our own assumptions about it, right? But what I am finding is that with the data being as important as it is to validate some of what we're seeing, I'm also finding that leaders are connecting to what they're feeling and experiencing on a more human side. So recruiting is a perfect example right now. It takes very little data to convince a hiring manager that we need to do something different in the recruiting space, because they're feeling it, they know it. had a conversation with the leader recently to say, listen, we need to speed up our recruitment practice. We need to, streamline some of these interview processes. A software engineer is on the market for 4 days right now. You've got 4 days. They're getting a call on Monday, an interview on Tuesday. They're crafting an offer on Wednesday, and Thursday they've resigned. And they feel that and they know that. And then you support that with data and help them understand what their competitors are facing. And, to Kristen's point earlier, I think that's where we get let's just do it. Let's try it. Let's go. And we've got to do something and see if we can have a different outcome, right?
For those of you that have sort of connections to talent acquisition, to the recruiting function, I'm just curious about what, so Holly, to your point, right, the speed for software developers. Any other sort of maybe key themes coming in or just learnings over these past several months of what's changing, particularly in how we are recruiting talent?
Speed is important. The candidate experience has never been more important, but even more strategically than that. Like, we spent a lot of last fiscal year, we run a July to June fiscal year, rebuilding our EVP, and to even be able to talk about with candidates, like, what is the value proposition to coming and working at CDK Global? It's not the same that it was a year ago. The way we talk to candidates about what they really get when they come to work here is just not the same set of criteria anymore. And I think it's challenging the recruiters to recruit differently and reframe their talk tracks and really be more intentional and human in that process. Particularly as we're talking about recruiting women, and just the value proposition has changed. And I think we're seeing challenges with really getting our teams to think differently about every single interaction they have with a candidate is a meaningful one, and could be the deal breaker for that conversation if we don't find the right value proposition to communicate.
Yeah, Holly, I just want to double and triple down on what you just said. We're doing similar work. Now we're actually collaborating with our head of brand strategy for the entire firm to craft what we're calling, I don't know if it'll stay this way, but we're referring to it as an employee brand promises. So this sense of what are we willing to commit to the individual employee, to the type of experience that they are going to have. And it is, I think your point about if you're still talking the same talk track that you were 24 months ago, the market is probably flying right past you. Because there is, back to this reference I had before about the shift of power, people have a much clearer point of view, or perhaps a different point of view. It may have been clear before, but now it's just a different point of view about what they expect in an employer-employee relationship. And we're all being challenged to sort of use design thinking to start with empathy for the employee themselves and work your way backwards. What is it they need to hear and experience to want to be here, as opposed to what is it we need from you? And if it starts out sounding like that, you're behind already.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that point about the candidate experience and starting with empathy, I just find for me, when I'm talking with our talent acquisition team, the insights that they have, similar to how I feel like people are listening to the talent function and we provide the data and they're there. These are our frontline brand ambassadors. And what are they hearing about? Hey, it's okay. Yes, might be the money. It's the flexibility. It's how am I growing? It is what is my team like, right? They are key data points for what's happening in the marketplace. And so I think we're finally doing a better job of actually listening to what are they hearing. And then to your point, like how do we, all right, we might have to change the talk track a little bit, but let's use the data that comes in from these people that are talking with folks in the candidate and in the market who may be passively looking as well as actively looking. So we're really getting a sense of what's important. All right. So with that, hopefully we've whet your appetite and you can hear from these amazing panelists, just, whether you're in fintech, whether you're in software, whether you're in global manufacturing, just what is happening. Again, this time of movement and renegotiation And so I think we're going to continue on our conversation. So Aaron, I'm going to send it
Yeah.
to you and tee us up for part 2.
Yeah, great. So part 2 is we're gonna move into smaller groups to have a conversation. And just so you know, these groups are assigned at random. So if you really were interested to hear what's happening at Harley-Davidson because you're a manufacturer and you didn't get assigned there, don't worry. We're going to record this so you can go back and access that recording. We're going to spend about 40 minutes or so, 50 minutes in these breakout groups, and then we're going to come back together as a full group and adjourn. One of the things also, just in terms of a format perspective, it will be a smaller moderated conversation for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Think about all those questions that you've developed from the conversation thus far and in our breakout groups. Post them in the chat and we'll open it up to those conversations for the last 15 minutes or so. So that's going to be the format we're going to follow. With that said, Chelsea, could you move us to the breakout groups?
Sure.
Excellent. Thanks, Chelsea. Well, there we are. Let's go ahead and get started. So, Kristen, I'm going to start, or I'm sorry, Holly, I'm going to start with you. I'm curious if you're seeing a particular shape or pattern to this concept of the Great Resignation. I know CDK Global, you have a lot of engineers, you have a lot of tech talent, presumably lots of different generations. Are you seeing any patterns that are emerging in terms of those that are looking for a different value prop or something new?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think in the last session, we talked a little bit about the pace at which some of this is happening in these different industries. And I think even within industries, we're seeing it happen, across different segments. So of course, I think it hit first our talent in the West Coast, our tech talent, our software engineers very quickly became the group that, wants to be 100% remote. They want to pack up and go to Fiji and work when they want, where they want. How they want. And it's a much more already established kind of cultural expectation among many of those tech companies in the Valley. But I think across other talent segments, we're starting to see it less so as I would suspect generationally, actually, which is interesting. And I'd love anybody else's thoughts on that. But I think there was an assumption going into this that our younger generations and millennials would be the first to run to the table and say, we also want to be remote. I'm actually finding in our organization, our newer career folks, I think are really hungry still for the visibility and the opportunity to be observed and feel like they've got people in their corner to help them get ahead in the early stages in their career. And we haven't quite figured out how to make that happen for them in a very virtual world when our suspicion was they'd be the first at the table for remote. But I think the largest piece we're trying to work through now is this trend of more women leaving the organization. We are seeing an increase in attrition overall, but we're seeing about 2 to 3x the attrition of women in the organization. And so we're really trying to get under the hood on that one right now and figure out how can we change the pace of that, because that's certainly something we don't want to see happen.
And Holly, is your sense they're leaving the workforce? Are they going to something different, more flexibility, more autonomy? Do you have any sense for the patterns that you're picking up there? Because I've heard that happening to other organizations as well.
I do think in large part for us, it's the apprehension about what kind of flexibility we would have. So we have been, up until just a couple of months ago, we were still saying we were going to come back in January up to 3 days a week. And I think for a lot of people, that was enough for them to start picking up the phone, particularly women who want more flexibility. I mentioned our Pulse survey. I mean, we can see distinct differences in our weekly survey more recently of women saying they value managers who are going to connect with them on a human level, who understand that they've got a life that they're also trying to manage, that they want acceptance, that kids might run behind your Zoom every once in a while, right? Those are just a different set of values that I think women possess now, and they're going to seek ways to go find that. And I think for us, the learning is we waited too long to be clear about that direction. We've spent a lot of time saying, well, here's what we know right now, as of right now, and finally needing to move to some more progressive ways of announcing our flexibility. But I think, in the absence of that, women have said, if I can't have that, I'm going to go find a place that I can have that. And that's contributing, which is unfortunate for us. But I think a lot of other organizations are feeling that as well.
Thanks, Holly. Kristen, what about at Harley Davidson? I mean, you mentioned you have 600 plus engineers. You have a manufacturing workforce. Are you seeing any patterns in terms of this great resignation?
What we're seeing right now is that people are choosing to leave for those career opportunities, for lack of a better description. And they're, to Holly's point, they're more willing to have that conversation now because Harley is making this transition from very well-known, very process-driven, very structured, and we're shifting to a little bit more loose, a lot less black and white of this, then this. And so for people who may have been with us for a while, that's feeling very uncomfortable. It's feeling not like they're used to having it feel. And so we're also not seeing the same thing from a generational perspective that I think everybody did assume, is that it would be the millennials and that who were just as happy to work at home. I think we're seeing it in some of our older employees. And so when we really think about that in that knowledge worker space, those are some of the things that we're seeing. In our manufacturing environments, it's a little bit different. We have facilities in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Brazil, and in Thailand. And what we're seeing mainly in Pennsylvania, it's in a heavily industrialized area. So there's a lot of competition. We are seeing very, very high turnover within the first 90 days. And so that for us is really an indication that these are folks who are coming into a manufacturing role for the very first time, maybe not with an organization who has ever offered them benefits. And so we're spending a lot more time kind of explaining everything that they will have as an employee of Harley Davidson. And so for us, that churn on that particular side of the house from a manufacturing perspective is something that's very concerning for us, because as we continue to get back to a space where we can produce, we are really looking at how do we make sure that those manufacturing employees are staying. And so that's where we're really looking at the technology, the automation, all of those types of things in that space as well.
And Kristen, but before you go back on mute, I'm curious, just given that we do a lot of work with manufacturers, and the reference point that they keep offering up is, well, Amazon's offering $3,000 now in terms of a signing bonus, preparing for the holiday season. They're paying for an education, and they're also offering other perquisites as well. I mean, is that thoughts on competing with this arms race of comp and Ben? I mean, that's got to be a conversation that you guys are having daily.
It's definitely a conversation that we're having, but we also know that increased employee costs over time is not necessarily something that we're going to be able to sustain, depending on what happens in the marketplace 4 or 5 years from now, right? And so what we understand is that we have a very solid benefits package. We have a very solid pay structure. We're unionized in the United States, which does limit what we can do. And so what we're really driving towards are the different ways that we can compel people to come and be part of the team. But we also don't necessarily want to get into the one-upmanship in terms of, we will give you a $4,000 signing bonus, or we will increase the benefits package. Those types of things for us aren't necessarily going to drive the long-term skill building and high potential that we want to be seeing in that workforce. And so we're really looking at, okay, if we're going to negotiate with the union to get a bonus in, it's going to be after a year. It's not going to be right away on day one. And so what we're really looking at is what are those long-term investments that we can make that are going to help employees want to be part of the team.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's been described by some CEOs that I've spoken with as an arms race when it comes to comp and total rewards. It's just one-upmanship. Holly, I'm curious. Do you think this phenomena that we're experiencing right now in terms of mental exhaustion, new EVP, the sort of the New Deal, is this a durable phenomena? Do you think it's, and if it is, how do we need to be thinking differently, more long-term, if this is indeed durable?
I think it's as durable as we're going to make it, is the question. I think some of us are going to start to see over the next probably 12 to 18 months how durable our own organizations are going to be in this movement. I think most of us, not all of us, but most of us fell into a situation where we were forced into this remote work very quickly. And I think we've operated still for, a year plus thinking that this is a temporary state. And I don't know that we've all made the pace of change that we needed to think about this as a long-term change. And so the risk, in my opinion, is that we now are at the point of saying, well, crap, if this is going to be permanent, like we really need to rethink the infrastructure around how work gets done. And that's an entirely different journey that we have to go on. And I think you're going to see organizations start to split here shortly, where you've got organizations that are doing the new way of work in the old ways of working. And you're going to see companies that really are going to adapt and support. We're starting to have more robust conversations around what does it really mean from a technology standpoint? Like, yeah, we have Outlook, we have Zoom, we have Slack, we have the stuff. Are our people utilizing it effectively? Are they all the right tools? Do we need different tools if we're talking about employees getting together once a quarter or twice a year versus hobbling together this remote workplace? As an example, I think there's a lot of infrastructure changes that need to be done to think about how we collaborate, how we show up, how we help support the new and career folks, how we think about diversity and inclusion in a workplace like this. And I think, directly to your question here, I think companies are either going to rise to that or they're not. And it's either going to be durable and sustainable or it's not.
Mm-hmm. Kristen, what about you? Same question. You think this is durable? And if so, how is Harley Davidson thinking about the next year, 3 years to prepare for this phenomena that may be here to stay?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, it is here to stay based on what our CEO has told us. So if I look at our new C-suite, really, we have 3 executives who are based currently here in Milwaukee, where we have our headquarters. Everybody else is spread out around the country. And so what we know is that for us, for right now, this is the way that we are going to be working and into the foreseeable future. I think just like Holly said, there is a lot of conversation now about, when we had the pandemic response, we lifted and we just shifted what we were doing to our houses. And what I have not seen, and even I as a professional haven't been able to make the change here in a lot of ways, but I haven't seen us really alter the way that we work. Whether it is in the asynchronous world, whether it is additional use of video or transcripts or less meetings or, the global collaboration, all of those things. And so for us, what we're really focused on is, to Holly's point, do we have the right tools? Are people leveraging them in the best ways? And are we shifting the way that we're getting things done and how we're measuring the output or the outcome? And we can't rely on how many hours people are spending on their computers. We have to really look at what is the output, what is the outcome, what are the relationships that are being built, and what is the community that's being fostered, rather than how many hours is someone's, parked in the parking lot. And so for us, this is really something that is in 2022 is going to be a very big focus of how we talk about talent development, how we talk about leadership, how we talk about being an effective employee. Those are all ways that we're going to really be spending time in that space.
I think there's an element too here of sense checking, Erin and Kristen, like the strength of your decisions that you're making right now, right? So Erin, you made a comment about just the arms race on comp. And I think we're finding ourselves in a position at this point to ask very frequently, like, is this a decision that we can stand behind a year, 3 years, 5 years from now? Or is this a decision that we're having to make right now for what could be a temporary supply and demand shift in the market or something else? And, we're talking about real estate, utilization of real estate footprints and really big business decisions that will alter the way that we conduct business. And I think we're asking ourselves a lot, like, is this a decision we'll stand behind a year, 3 year, 5 years from now? And if it is, then it's probably the right direction to start moving.
Yeah. Great conversation. One of the questions that came in from Ronaldo Borger, a great one. Do you think remote work will be permanent because of company choice or because talent is now demanding it and they now have the power? Kristen, let's hear from you first on that one.
Honestly, I believe that we're not going to be able to put this genie back in the bottle. I think we've talked about it in, once you do start to tell people that you're anticipating opening an office or bringing them back, we start to get people who are very nervous and look around. We're reducing our physical footprint for our knowledge worker offices by over 50% globally. So there's not even space to bring people back anymore. So that's part of it. But I do not, if my boss told me I had to go back to the office 5 days a week or even demanded that I was there 3 days a week, I would probably start looking. So I don't believe that it's something that we're going to be able to reverse. And I don't know that it's something we want to reverse.
Thanks. Holly, your thoughts on that?
I think employees have the upper hand, and that's why I keep referring to this as a movement. I think it really is an entirely new definition led by employees in a much larger scale than we saw, radical change a few years ago around how we treat performance management, right? Like employees said, enough is enough. I don't like this process. I don't get value from this process. I want more feedback. Employees have seen that they can make those types of waves. And I think it's for the right purpose. I think it's with the right intent. And I think, if we're going to continue to tout that that's our greatest asset, then we need to think about how we're helping to support them in the ways that they feel like they can come do their best work in an organization. And if that's what they're telling us it is right now, then it's on us as talent practitioners and organizations to respond to that and make that happen.
Excellent. Kristen, you mentioned something in our full group conversation that I'd love for you to expand upon. You mentioned, this virtual mindset, future of work. In particular, you used two phrases, autonomy and agency. One of the questions that I had for you both was about power dynamics and how power dynamics are changing as a result of the Great Resignation and some of the leverage that talent has. Could you just expound a little bit upon agency and what you mean by that? I think that's an interesting concept.
Absolutely. So as we've been talking about it, it really is about helping our teams to understand what the priorities are, and then also stepping back and letting that work happen as it needs to happen over a period of time, and really not being very prescriptive in how that work will happen. Now, as we have people who are new in their careers, obviously they need additional assistance. But as we think about this, as we look at helping employees understand what the strategy is of the business, pointing them in the right direction and really making sure they have the right tools and saying how you achieve this, I'm not going to dictate that. If you want to, we're talking about something as simple as if you want to work from 8 o'clock at night till 4 o'clock in the morning, go right ahead. So really those agency pieces are where can employees make those decisions, and where can we as leaders step back, allow that to happen so that we can focus on some other things. And I think that that's a very important conversation to be having around those decisions. do I want to go work in Tahiti? Do I want to, it was for those of you in the Midwest, it has been glorious few days. Shut the computer off and go play outside with your family, get your stuff done whenever you want to during the day. So, and not feeling that they have to be tied to their computer. It's 8 hours a day. So when we talk about agency, it's really a combination of here are the priorities, go get it done. But then also, what do you see in the business that needs to be addressed and changed? And what do you suggest? And so those two things are really kind of how we talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Holly, what about at CDK Global? How are you guys thinking about this idea of autonomy, flexibility, agency? I mean, it almost sounds like we're going to treat our employees like adults. Talk to us about how you guys are thinking about that. I mean, it puts a lot of, it changes the expectations of your workforce, and you're giving them more autonomy.
It does. What I find interesting about the pivot that we're in now and having this conversation, it's almost like we've gone through this thing in more than two phases. Like we've gone through this was all temporary, and now all of a sudden we're saying, okay, now this could be permanent, and let's now think about the future of work. The reality of it is we've been doing this for 1.5 years. And so I think my struggle with it a little bit is let's not pretend that hasn't been happening at a greater scale than I think even we're talking about needing it going forward. How many of us gave employees reprieve over the school year to say, go take 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the day and go do your Zoom learning with your kids, and you'll be on and get your work done when you're on. So I guess one observation is let's not pretend that it hasn't been happening and we haven't been doing that. How do we continue to help reinforce that? And maybe some of that is just a shift to less extremes, but continuation of how we continue to support those things. We are seeing more of it. And what I think is interesting from a talent standpoint is I think the core of the solve for how we make that happen effectively is not different than what talent practitioners have been talking about for years, is like the capability of the manager. How do we just continue to help reinforce how our managers stay close to employees, understand how to set really good expectations, coach, provide feedback, be there to support, demonstrate empathy, and help individually each employee realize how we get the most out of them. And that sounds very basic, but I know all of you spend your days trying to figure out how to solve for that and make that even better. I guess I'm suggesting that it's not a radically different approach that we should have been taking all along. We kind of just need to double down on it now and really help managers understand what that looks like in this new world and be accepting of more things like Kristen may go for a walk and may ask to take the call not on Zoom because she's tired of Zoom that day. And she wants to get out and walk around the block and take the call, and that's okay. So,
yeah, this concept of agency, as I thought, has generated a lot of discussion in the chat. I'm going to ask Kristen if you could respond to kind of a two-parter here. Aaron Jocelyn says agency sounds kind of like agile. How are you preparing leaders to work differently in this mindset? And then Tiffany also asks, how are you equipping managers? So if we think about leaders and managers sort of creating this new ways of working, are there any, programs, practices, are you selecting different people? Like, how are you equipping them to work differently as this durable phenomena seems to be with us to stay?
I think, Aaron, it really does go back to some of what Holly was saying around some of the basics, right? So this is, leadership management 101, right? It is the conversations that we need to have around how leaders were behaving and interacting during the heightened pandemic. And now we're moving into this, and we're really trying to stem the tide of moving back to business as usual. And really having those conversations around helping leaders understand that the more freedom, the more decision-making power their teams have, the more likely they are to produce high impact results, and the more likely they are to stay. And so as we have those conversations with leaders, we are really talking, and we're not doing anything formal, right? So we don't have a formal program. We have leadership roundtables that we pick a topic, we pull together, 20 or so leaders in small groups over the period of probably 2 weeks, and we get them to talk to each other. We get them to share best practices. We have the conversation around where they're sensing pushback in their teams, where they're helping to make those decisions on the agency piece, and really helping them to understand that those skills and those behaviors that they exhibited in the first 6-8 months of the pandemic really are the things that they need to pull all the way through the way that they lead. So that high empathy, that, to Holly's point, go take the time off in the middle of the day. Okay, your kid might be back at school, but you don't need to have an excuse to walk away from your computer. And we as leaders I'm not going to say that someone with a child can walk away in the middle of the day and someone who doesn't have a child cannot. Like, I'm not, as a leader, making those decisions. And so really helping them understand that this is also part of that inclusiveness. So when we think about inclusion in this space, we cannot create rules for one group of employees that don't travel and translate to another group as well. So there's a lot of those kinds of conversations going on in very small, meaningful groups of people right now.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Shifting gears a bit, I'm curious, Holly and Kristen, what are some of the fundamentals as it relates to talent management programs, processes, tools that you're not changing, that you're doubling down on the fundamentals and you're going to sort of shore that up? I mean, because certainly we've talked about lots of things that are changing. What's not changing for you?
It's a good question. So much has changed. I guess I would suggest that there are some core processes and programs that we're really just doubling down on and finding new ways to accelerate. Performance management is a great example. I mean, a few years ago, we made the shift, like many other companies did, to move to, more dynamic check-in conversations and more, a better balance of the what and the how and how we assess performance. And I think we had a moment during the pandemic where we were like, whew, glad we did that pre-pandemic, because that is the foundation for how we really need to Kristen's point, talk about what does productivity look like? What does good performance look like? It's going to challenge us to think about the how in even newer ways now. Like, how did you collaborate when you weren't with people to get things done? And that is just as important, if not more important right now than the output of some of the work that you did. So I can't say that our performance management process changed. I don't think there was really any fundamental change to it, but it is an area that we're doubling down more, as opposed to like the difference between classroom and remote learning, which obviously was a huge change for everybody.
Right. Kristen, what about you? Anything that's in your portfolio in terms of how you manage talent that you're going to stick to the fundamentals, double down instead of reinvent?
Man, I really wish I could say yes, but we've turned everything upside down. We weren't as fortunate as Holly in terms of making that shift before the pandemic. So in December of 2020, we eliminated our formal performance management system. We got rid of the computer software that did it. We said, have conversations with your people. We helped leaders make that shift and did some training and support around that. We have transitioned our compensation structure and our plan. We moved to broadbanding in the middle of the pandemic. We have changed we no longer have a formal merit system that we're using. So everything that we're doing from a talent perspective has changed. But what we are continuing to do is build on the internal mobility of our people to be able to fill openings, fill needs, foster that career development. And I think, Holly, it was you who said, if they're 70 to 80% ready, move them. Like, let's give them the opportunity and then support them when they get there. So those are the things that we would say would be kind of fundamental that we are really, really focusing on right now.
Great. Yeah, I see Jeff is off camera, but he has to really, like, he as we were pulling together this session, he shared a perspective that he had in terms of what Morningstar is doing around. Jeff, do you maybe want to share the cannibalization of talent, the internal recruiters?
Yeah, just, our perspective is that our employees are getting emails from LinkedIn or others every day with lists of jobs that might be suitable to them. And our feeling is that they're not getting nearly enough communication from us about other roles at Morningstar that might be suitable for them. So just if you look at that contrast between what thoughts are being sparked about jobs outside versus inside, it's something we felt like we really need to address. And so we're trying to, really improve that ability to understand, hear about, and evaluate internal opportunities much more aggressively. And as part of that too, it's the protocols around how we approach employees. Even if it's an email like I described, I think in our old way of thinking, managers might get ruffled about, poaching talent is the word that is so often used. So how can we change those kind of norms and say to them, look, if we don't approach our best talent about other opportunities, other people will from outside, and we're as more likely to lose them to another company as you are to another part of the business. So that's something that's very top of mind for us.
Yeah. And so playing off that, Holly, Kristen, talent exchanges, gigs, future of work, are there innovations like what Jeff shared that you all are trying out in your organization to try to keep people there?
Definitely trying to do more of the gig work. I think initially it started out of necessity, just the inability to be able to fill roles in some of the high levels of vacancy. We've said, how do we just utilize people differently, reprioritize, and spin it as a benefit? Like, we need you to go do this thing because there's no one else to do it, and this is good for your career. And doing that at a larger scale now, we just implemented Workday, so we've got a lot more capability now to be able to manage some of this from a system perspective. But being graceful about getting people even cross-functionally. I was just sharing the story. I've got a couple open recruiter roles, and I've got somebody in the business in a very unsuspecting role who has a master's degree in HR and raised her hand and say, hey, I'd be interested in doing recruiting. And it was kind of like, oh my gosh, like how would we have ever known this person sitting buried in the business that wants to come and do this role? And it was inspiring for us to think about, how do we just be more vocal and socialize? To Jeff's point, like, we've got to get better communication out there to let people know those opportunities are there, and we have to be willing to let them be 70% ready and come and do the job and train them up to it, because that's more advantageous than trying to find talent on the external market right now.
Great. Kristen,
And I think,
what about at Harley Davidson? What are you guys trying out in terms of future of work, new innovations to keep people?
well, and I think that some of the things that Holly was talking about are definitely things that we're also focused on. So in terms of being able to highlight high impact projects across the organization where we can ask people to volunteer, right? And have those conversations. So we've started framing up cross-functional teams in terms of, here's the work, here's what we think it will take. And oh, by the way, here's what you're going to learn and develop as part of this team. And really having those conversations up front to say, have a conversation with your manager. If this is something you need to develop, this is a great way for you to do it that your manager might not be aware of. So we're going to ask that you start those conversations. And we've put a lot of responsibility on the employee in this space to kind of take that ownership to say, I really am interested in learning what they do over there. And I'm going to make that effort to start to build those relationships cross-functionally as well. In 2022, one of our new metrics will be around internal mobility. And, managers will be probably encouraged to have more people moving in and out of their team internally than, to Jeff's point, holding on to their talent. So that's one of the ways that we're kind of shifting that measurement.
Great. I'm going to, by the way, anybody in this room can, I believe, unmute yourself and ask a question. So at this time, if you'd like to ask a question, to our panelists, feel free to unmute, and we can do that. I'll wait a few seconds here to see if anybody takes me up. And if not, I have another question here in the chat that I can ask.
Good morning, folks. This is Tiffany Selman. Sorry to be on video off this morning. It's been an early morning. I think, Holly, you were just talking about, and I love this concept of really marketing your internal mobility more. We're a really small company inside of a bigger company of about 200 people. So the opportunities are there, but they're posted, et cetera. I'm more thinking about the folks who want to just explore and stretch. And, to your point, Holly, that recruiter, from the business, like, wonderful. How are you empowering and engaging the individual employee to take more ownership, more action themselves? I'm hearing in exit interviews where we, of course, have had a great amount of attrition, our record this, ever, that yes, they have the conversation with their manager. Yes, they, have the talk about what more they can do, but yet there's still this gap of getting to a point where they feel like they've received training, development, et cetera. And to me, there's an action piece missing then. So what are the kinds of things that we can and we should be thinking about with respect to putting more on the individual?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we run into that a lot. And, employees waiting for the managers to do something, right? And I don't think that's the world that we're living in anymore. We've got to empower them. And, obviously there's some architectural things like the way you design your performance management approach and really are transparent about the role of the employee in that process that I think can help, and helping them define that their career mobility is up to them, and their manager's role in that is to guide, support, coach, mentor. And that sets the stage for it being a different expectation than I'm waiting for Aaron to come tell me when there's a webinar I can go log into or when there's a gig I can go do. Yeah. But I think the other aspect of it, Tiffany, is, back to the comment we made earlier around kind of the sustainability, the durability, and the infrastructure changes here is, I think what you're describing requires us to think differently about how we organize work too. And in a lot of cases, particularly in smaller orgs, you may not have an abundance of open roles that you can put some last season new in career folks to come in and try it. I'm sure more of your roles are really dependent on, the appropriate output and productivity of those roles. But how can we think about how we organize work differently? Could we create a gig that may not exist in today's hierarchy? Is there somebody's role, back to the 70%? If we have somebody 70% ready to take a role, maybe you take that role and you split it in two for a while and you let somebody else dip into the other 30% and you have the 70% person ready to take it. I think the challenge with that is it requires more thought, more people to sit down and say, what could this look like? And let's challenge our assumptions about how work is organized and who we're looking for. Do you need a master's degree to do this job? Maybe not. Maybe that could open an opportunity for somebody somewhere else in the org to do this. And I think when you have those conversations, it'll help to accelerate, that expectation with the employees where they'll see more opportunity and they'll gravitate more towards taking that opportunity if we can couple that with the value they get in their career mobility from it. We're finding in our survey data, by the way, a lot of validation of what I just heard you say, which is people, close to 90% of people say, yes, I'm learning every day. I can learn new skills. I'm growing. We see far fewer favorable responses on, and I know what it's doing to help me get ahead in my career. There's a disconnect between I'm on LinkedIn learning, I'm watching webinars, I'm doing all this stuff. I feel like I'm learning. I can't figure out how I'm applying it to the end of, some destination in my career. Help me close that gap. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great insight. Kristen, you have any thoughts on that topic? I saw you're nodding your head quite a bit there.
Yeah, and I think what Holly is talking about is really important for any organization to talk about how they're going to do that. But I think in light of what we're calling this great resignation, right? You are up against managers who potentially have job openings of their own. And now you're coming for potentially somebody who is their highest talent and saying, you know what, we'd really like to take this person, we'd like to take them away from you, and we'd like to put them over here. And so understanding the business impact and having some responses, some answers, and some conversations about priorities and goals with that leader and that leader's leader to say, if we really want to move talent, we have to change the goals, because we are, instead of 5 openings now, this person has 6, and we've probably taken their highest performer. So you have to, as a professional in this space, I think, really go with that business solution of saying, understanding that talent mobility potentially impacts your strategy, it potentially impacts your output, and how are we going to help the business address that and continue to meet the demands that we have?
Yeah, Kristen, I know back in the day, GE and one of our longtime clients, Corning, was really good about measuring talent exporters, managers that were good at developing talent and then exporting into other parts of the business. Obviously, talent that stayed and grew, but it wasn't. It was something that they got a lot of success from because it was recognized and rewarded. We're going to pull the full group back together again. Maybe one more question, brief question, if anybody wants to ask. Otherwise, we're probably going to get pulled back into the full group here any second. Erin?
I have a question. Yeah, we've implemented some agile projects, and so that takes on this agency mentality. But what it's also done is it said this group gets to be in this agency mentality, and everybody else go operate like you normally operate. And so it's actually created a gap almost between, as opposed to creating agency across. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about, closing the gap.
I think it's a tough one. I think it's not a peanut butter spread approach. I think, it's difficult for us to look at these situations and not treat every talent segment the same, because there's going to be a different approach for each one. I think it's okay that the approach is different if you're intentional about what you're trying to solve for that particular talent segment. I know we've only got about a minute, but that would be my point of view, unless Kristen, you've got something else.
No, my only and to that is, and you're transparent about it when you're talking about talent development with the organization, to say, this is why this happens, this is why it is this way, here's what we're experimenting with. As long as you have those conversations openly, I think Holly's 100% spot on. Having differences is not a problem as long as you're talking about it.
Yeah, and I would just offer up, it starts at the top, leadership setting the tone. Part of this is a cultural change too, and getting folks to adopt new ways of working. And, if you have leaders at top that are setting a new tone and demonstrating these behaviors and reinforcing them, I think you're going to be better off.
Yeah, I think it was Adam Grant that said employees tend to be okay with unequitable outcomes if they understand that the process was fair to get there, right? And I think we're seeing a lot of that now, and it's going to happen even more as we talk about expectations for performance, level of autonomy in work, who's going to return to office and not. People just want to understand how those decisions are being made, I think.
Okay, excellent. Well, listen, this was a great conversation. Holly, Kristen, thanks so much for your insight and wisdom today. Thanks again to everybody for their contributions today. Again, great conversation. I know I sure learned a lot, and we'll take some of that knowledge with me. Thanks again. Take care.
Well, so my name's Chris Mason. I lead talent and total rewards at KeHE. We're a food distributing company based out of Naperville. Very quickly now, we have sort of three headquarters, kind of post-COVID. So we're hubbed in Naperville, but we have a presence in Jacksonville, Florida, and a growing presence in Boulder, where there's a really cool, innovative food scene, and we do a lot of organic, natural food distribution. And then we have a bunch of distribution centers and a bunch of drivers. So we're not huge compared to some of the big ones. We're about 6,200 people now, about $6 billion in revenue. And that's us. That's a little on me. And I'm here to moderate this breakout group. And this is my favorite part of this program. We started this format in our last session a few months ago, and we're trying it again because it works so well. And what made it work really well is that you all who have joined this breakout, you're going to participate and get involved, and we'll draw you into this. So a couple of things I was hearing and just resonating with was, one of the macro questions is this thing real? This kind of great resignation, is any of this happening? I think generally the feeling is, yeah, there's something very real going on here. COVID was a great accelerator of many trends. And I loved some of the comments that, Mary talked about is, it's not the great resignation, it's the great negotiating and negotiation. I think, Mary, there's some great work you're starting to do around how do you revamp the value proposition. Debbie, I was really inspired by your comment that said, if 2008 and 9 and 10 were the year of the CFO, we're trying to figure out how to get through the crisis of financials. This is the year of the CHRO, of talent, of HR. This is our chance to rise up and shine. And some of the themes I just heard from the panel were, this is the time to get out there and fail fast and fail forward and learn and, try things, and people are open to it. And Mary, your point was good. It's like people are open to it, especially because there's some acute problems. So, so I, want to kind of, keep us moving on some of these kind of thinkings. And one thing I just wanted to level set on, one of the questions we had in this breakout that I feel like is more macro, and I'd love to hear from you, Mary and Debbie, is, okay, so we agree something's changing. There's a lot changing, right? At this point, and it's always hard to predict the future, but what is your best prediction on what will stick out of this change versus what might be more transient? What is some of this, 2 years from now, we're just going to look back and say, oh no, we'll all be back in the office. It all just was a passing phase. Or, what of this will carry forward? What has really changed? And I think we're saying some things have changed, but maybe I could start with you, Mary, because you had some great points, and we'll build on that.
Yeah. I love the space. And by the way, one thing I think I'd love for us to do collectively as a group is if we were all forcing ourselves to come up with an employee value proposition or employee brand promises, and we started writing down what we think those things are, it wouldn't surprise me if the overlap that we all put down was about 80%, of the things that we're seeing and experiencing and hearing. And yet we're all trying to come up with what that unique thing is for us. Right? Which goes to this point, Chris, about your question, what's changing? I started writing about this probably 2 or 3 months into the pandemic. So the mid 2020, which is, it's sort of the rise of our humanity. I don't think that genie is going back in the bottle, right? People have had to experience an intensity of life in a way that has caused them to deeply and profoundly think about what work is and where it fits in their life and what kind of meaning that they want to draw from that. And I think this whole humanity thing that we are social beings, we are meant to be together, we crave purpose and meaning, and organizations that can figure out how to do that will become the compelling organizations. I think the other thing that comes screaming off the page for me as well too is for those of us that have any influence over leadership development, this is a scary time for a lot of people that don't know how to have conversations that are ambiguous, where people have a need to share and want to talk about what's important to them and want to know if the company is listening. Are you hearing me? Are you paying, and this sense of, it's not a labor union, I don't mean it that way, but the collective power of employees. I think we have the makings of a movie in Hollywood of the, the rise of the employee. It is definitely this collective sense of people saying, wait a minute, perhaps we can architect some of the considerations and ground rules for what employment is, and we want a voice in that. We're not willing to just do what someone else has said has to be done. We have a voice to influence the world of work, and that part, that emotive character, that humanity, and that sense of collective influence, I personally believe is here to stay.
Hi, this is John Estrop. I can just jump in and add to Mary what you just talked
please.
about. I think to your point, we do consulting. We have a search practice as well as a HR consulting practice. And what I found with our clients, people that are essential workers in that frame were far different and above the curve than other organizations that weren't essential. As people were struggling, I see a lot of heads nodding, so I think I'm sort of calling it out, right? And you, Chris, you in the food industry, essential workers. I mean, you guys were real time. To Mary's point, we need that interface, and essential workers had it. They never really lost it, but some of the functions did, and some of the other financial technology firms did, because they weren't essential, and they were struggling with, how do we operate? How do we get better? How do we do the new normal, right? So I think there's a lot, to Mary, your point, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the new normal and what the ground rules are, and they're still changing. With the federal government, with the mandates on the vaccine, it's changing the way people operate totally. So the Band-Aid has been ripped off and people are trying to charter a different path forward.
That's a very acute observation that some of the segments are ahead of the curve. And I'll just say we have a huge driver workforce. If you have drivers today, that's a very challenging job market to hire for, because they are acting, as Mary's describing, almost like a collective group. Some of them are unionized for us, but most aren't. But they know they've got the power. Debbie, I wanted to draw you in, and then I'd love to hear from others around this broader question of what do you, just kind of macro level, what are we seeing?
Thick, right? So that is, as I was thinking about this question, and then Mary started talking, I was like, okay, I wrote down flexibility, I wrote down empathy and connection. I'm with you, Mary, on the humanity and the need for the leader, the people leader role. I mean, it is, those of us that have been in this space always knew it was challenging, but how many of us, like, I wasn't around in 1918 and work was different in 1918. And we all went through hopefully a once in a lifetime or finishing once in a lifetime pandemic. And what that brings up are very metaphysical questions, right? So I do think that question, like, why work, how work, where work? Yes. And I'm also going to challenge us and say, but we also have very different situations. I think, Mary, what you're describing is very much the knowledge worker, of which is a lot of my organization. But if we're talking about hourly workforce, or we're talking about essential workers or frontline, I mean, look at how many coffee shops aren't open like after 3. Like there's something significant going on. I think that might course correct, but I think this piece around flexibility, empathy, and connection are here to stay. And I think that the evolution of what that people manager, people leader role is key. And it's much less on technical and much more on, like, we are now the nexus point for that connection and that humanity and that flexibility. And so how do you learn to lead that way and have challenging conversations? The other thing that I'm hoping will stick, and it's interesting, again, our footprint is Canada and the US, so it's not global, but I do think Canada is much further ahead in terms of being able and willing to talk about mental well-being and mental wellness. And I think that it is just, we have shown a light, I'm not sure, on well-being and emotional well-being, on just people, I think, again, grappling with pandemics. I mean, Mary, just you as a pandemic parent, right? Like it's exactly, we're facing things that we never had to face before, and we're struggling. And I'm hoping that this focus on mental well-being is here to stay. And I'm hoping that we're normalizing it. And I'm hoping that we can check in on it the way that we were checking in on physical well-being 10, 15 years ago.
I'll just speak, I oversee the benefits side too. And I hear it even from big partners now, Aon, everyone's, that's kind of the talk off is it's whole person wellness. It's whole, they're not quite at the leading edge, people aren't at the leading edge collectively yet, but you just hear that conversation coming up more. And I agree, that's a positive trend. That's something we should have done 50 years ago,
Yeah, I mean, for those of you that have ever had responsibility for benefits coverage, Chris, like yourself, I mean, even think about how much lower benefit coverage is for behavioral health and for mental health
it's
compared to physical health. I mean, we have systematized it in a crazy way. Deb, I appreciate your acknowledgement of the knowledge worker component. You're spot on in that regard. It's quite different, and I think not only is it the sector that you work in, but if you're in a global company, we're all having to manage things at different paces. So what's happening in my India offices is not the same thing as in our London offices or in Amsterdam or in South Africa or in Toronto, or it is very hard to make blanket statements, and it's really pushing on agility as a new operating norm.
Well, what I'd love to, I was going to say is, can I draw in a few others, because kind of part two to our conversation today. Well, what are y'all doing about it? But before we move on to the what else are you seeing just trend wise? You're like, this is gonna stick. And do you resonate with what the panelists are saying? Things to add to it?
I was just going to comment on that earlier one, which is I think that point, and you think about where and how we provide services and solutions and how we think about supporting everyone, it's getting harder, right? Because it is 80% maybe the same, but it's that last 10 to 20% that's going to really make the difference. And as you think about these segments and you think about even kind of like equity and fairness, like there's a lot about like, do you go after the segments or do you go after the whole? And how do you really personalize it to people? Because success is going to look very different, not even within a segment, it's going to be different, right? And so I think it's helping our teams, helping managers really understand what is that uniqueness that gets to that 10 to 20% that makes it, powerful. And I think that's what we're right now growing our manufacturing kind of side of our business with phone tech repairs, and it's changing the footprint and it's changing the dynamics of our company, and what they want and what they value and what they need is very different than our knowledge workers. So I think, getting leaders to understand, that dynamic as you're changing so quickly, that term agile, it's like, where and how can you quickly, adapt and listen to those things, but also get to longer term solutions that you can sustain.
Chris, I'll chime in on that with Chandra. And sorry, my video seemed to have gone out with the bad internet here, but
we hear you great though. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So I'm with IDEX Corporation, so global manufacturing, and I would say, I'm loving hearing all of the new and different that everyone is doing in response to this. But to Chandra's point, part of what we're doing is also just how do we go back and get really good at some of the basics? Like, how do we help our leaders just really actively listen and engage with their employees? How do you have a really good conversation where you're understanding, what is that new skill that you're wanting to develop? Like, what is important to you based on where you're at in your life at this moment? Like, how can we help support you? So I think we're trying to do a little bit of that balance of how do we think about what's new and what's next, but also just get really fine-tuned on the fundamentals that are going to help with that engagement and help our people managers be better at that point of impact, as you said, Debbie.
Yeah, that's really good, Lindsay. Well, if I can just I'll keep it moving, and others feel free to jump in on the macro trends you're seeing too, but let's continue to sort of draw you into the question of, well, what are some of the things we're trying or doing about it? And it's some good questions coming on chat just around, we've heard from some of the panelists talking about renegotiating some of the brand promise. And even Holly, or one of our panelists, talked about, she oversees the recruiting side, and they're reworking their talk tracks, and the stuff that worked a year ago is like sounds so 2019 now, right? So they're renegotiating that, and they're working on that. What are you all doing out there? Is anybody sort of looking into kind of how you kind of create a different value proposition that's more compelling to the workforce today?
If I can just jump in from an executive search perspective, right? So many of you use executive search, and it's changed dramatically. What's changed is that the compelling talking points for the leaders who are hiring is completely different, and it's been painful for them because, to your point, Chris, it's not 2019, it's 2020, and it's the new world. And so instead of getting 3 candidates that we vetted through who made all the whole thing about location, about values, about how to work is become critical, where they're saying, thank you very much for your time. I think I'm going to go with my other opportunity. So this is like a shock to leaders who have never been told no, for the most part, right? and it's a different learning, but they have to jump on the train, and they have to be coached. And the world has changed.
Yeah, I would say you are at the front lines of it in that space. And so I appreciate hearing your perspective speaking into this. And I'm sure some of us have experienced it on the hiring side a bit too. So.
Right.
Others, what else are you starting to sort of change perspective of? And I guess what I'll just prompt you with is, I oversee on the one side talent management, leadership development, and it kind of feels like another kind of team, but it's comp and ben, it's total rewards. And what's interesting is I'll jump on one call that's all comp related. We got to pay people more, and probably true. And then the other side's all about, like, we've got to create a better experience. And what you realize is it's both, right? It's like what the value proposition has changed. You can pay a lot more for the same value prop. That's probably what you're gonna have to do if you change nothing over here on the work experience side. Or you can start rethinking the work experiences. And in our frontline warehouse roles, it's like, oh boy, we got to start job redesign and better experiences and better scheduling and stuff like that. And we probably have to pay them a bit more. But we're seeing the same thing with corporate work. And so I just wonder how you're all kind of approaching that side of how does talent management make work more compelling and better? And so we're not that we don't pay more, but it's not just about the money, it's about better work. Kylie, you came off mute. That's like the universal raise your hand sign.
There it is. Right? Yeah, so thanks. I just wanted to back up to the topic on perspectives and some of the shifts that we're seeing in our organization right now. And it seems to be that pre-COVID, leadership perspective was this holistic, overall big picture. And so it was easy to put out blanket statements, blanket policies, blanket terms and conditions, value propositions for employees. And now it's shifting to the point where the leaders and people managers need to shift into that role of looking at the individual perspective and understanding how to approach that person based on their experience. Because we're a global organization, everyone's experience through the pandemic was different. The essential worker versus the knowledge worker who could work comfortably from home without any risk. And then so they have to think about how to build that agility based on that individual, where the employee perspective needs to then shift to the more holistic in order to find the value in the consistent work that they've been plugging away at this entire time, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it's been, and trying to see themselves in the bigger picture. So the employee and the leader are kind of broadly to larger groups of employees. So that seems to be a big response that we're working on, is trying to build more individualized career development, but that can also be applied to big groups within the organization, if that makes sense. It's a balance, tricky balance.
Yeah, that's a really helpful perspective. All right, let's try on a few. Sharon, you're actually raising your hand. I appreciate that. Jump on in.
I think what we're really talking about here, when we talk about the new employee proposition and their values and understanding what they're feeling and their perspectives, is that leaders just need more emotional intelligence. That need to listen. Listen and silent have the same letters for a reason. And employees just need to know that their voice matters. And managers and leaders need to take more seriously building and nurturing relationships, because nobody cares what you know until they know you care. But the bottom line is these leaders are saying, but guess what? I got P&L responsibility. Yeah, I want to love them and I want them to love me. But we've got work that needs to be done. And so when we talk about the brand promise, when we talk about the new talk track, I'm like, negotiate what? I don't know if we're going to be so open to all that new negotiating stuff. And yes, we value, we know we learned a lot, we're listening, but guess what? We didn't meet our targets. And so what are we supposed to do about that? That's what I'm sitting here thinking. This whole, we're not going to pilot, we're just going to do it. Great idea, Holly. But some cultures don't allow you to fail fast. If we're failing fast, they're going to remember that. And they're going to remember you, the one that failed. And so what do we do in that situation? I don't know. I'm just saying.
No, it's a good way of framing the question. And in other words, how do you also negotiate? How do you make things better for employees when you're under crisis and stress and duress yourself, right? And I think we see that with a lot of our leaders too. They're human as well, and they're
human, and they're also somewhat. They haven't necessarily made the shift from it's all about the numbers to, but I got to make it a lot more about the people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that we've necessarily all made that shift in the culture of our firms.
Mm-hmm. Sharon, can I bridge to that? Because yes. I think you have where you have some leaders that may be unaware that they need to make that shift. And then there are some leaders that are sitting in a culture that I could recognize what you're describing, who want to make that shift and don't know how. Right? They want to be more human. They want to be more vulnerable, but they're so used to leading a certain way. And some of my work is a coach. And so part of the time I'm just like, what's one thing, how do you just share one thing that's going on? You don't have to be an open book. You don't have to show all of your warts and your concerns, but is there one thing you can do? And then after that, and just how are people responding? And it's how I think some leaders grew up in a way and they were not rewarded for showing their humanity, and they know they need to. And so how do we help coach them to just it's okay, just move a little bit, have one conversation, have one comment, try it. So I think there's this thing too about our role of just sort of helping leaders make this, who are open to it, right? Let's start with there first. And how do we help them be more genuine and connect with their workforce? So I'm finding I'm doing a lot of coaching around that, for what it's worth.
I can add to that, Debbie, too. One of the ways we're trying to get those leaders who are in that position where they recognize it's less about the numbers and more about the people is trying to teach them how to build psychological safety on their teams and helping our employees feel comfortable with failure, even in its smallest pieces, and building that into the performance model so that employees understand that there's some space and some room for them to experiment and try things and fall on their face, and that their leaders they're going to look at it as a development curve and not necessarily an opportunity to punish or put performance restrictors in place. There has to be a little bit more flexibility for failure, and finding ways to use that as an opportunity to learn and grow rather than getting to the bottom line and looking at your team from a numbers perspective. And so teaching how to build psychological safety has been key in our approach to getting our leaders to that next level.
Yeah, we're in the process of that as well. And I agree with you. In many ways, for whatever reason, people drive the numbers. People are the hub of the wheel. And so it's just making leaders understand Some do, of course. I don't mean blanketly that no one does, no one cares. Absolutely they do, but it's just really making that sink in. And people are at the center of everything that we do. And the psychological safety too, of course. Building that, thinking that. That was some new thinking for us. So thank you.
Yeah, I love that call out, Sharon. And if anything, part of what Mary called us, there's acute moments of pain right now for some of these leaders, and they may be the most open they'll ever be to some of these conversations. So I saw Candace came off mute, and Mary, you too. So maybe go Candace.
I was just going to say, never waste a good crisis,
Right, never waste the crisis. We do say that actually a lot right now. Candace.
Thanks. I just had a question for those that are doing some of these things you're talking about. I mean, we're having the same conversations about psychological safety and the importance of coaching. So far, though, we're delivering those trainings in the same traditional way. We've taken what you would have done in person in a classroom, and now it's a webinar. And it's got a lot of bells and whistles. It's very engaging. Our instructional designers and external partners are great. But then I wonder is that really making an impact on the associates? So I'm just curious if anyone's doing more than that initial training conversation to really make sure it sticks and that it's happening in practice in the conversations they're having with their teams.
Can I put Kate on that?
Yeah, so we have Debbie and Sharon. You both should go. So. All right, Debbie, then Sharon. How's that?
Oh, I was going to ask Kate Galimo, who I work with, who I think could talk to practice. Like, how are we helping? Like, how are we building and capability, and how are we working with our HR leads and other things around sustainability? You're welcome, Kate.
Well, let me just jump in here.
Yeah,
quickly,
we'll let Sharon jump in
Kate.
real quick here.
Just very quickly, we're doing training around emotional intelligence, and next will be part 2 of that will be radical candor. For part 1 of that, though, we are providing the training, which we think is pretty good training, some traditional components, but we've added bells and whistles. Then we've added post-training activities that we're going to come back in 8 weeks and say what worked, what did not work. And that will help inform us of the stickiness of the learning. And we are taking their feedback very seriously. And so we're coming back in 8 weeks, 10 weeks and saying, okay, what worked, what didn't work? And what more can we do to support you? What more can we do to enable progress in this space? So we are operating from a position of caring because this needs to be done.
Yeah.
Does that help?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing surveys, we're doing meetings, we're doing follow-up, focus groups, all of that. What more can we do? Did it work? We're giving them all of the tools to go back to their team to practice things like psychological safety, being candid, building trust. All right, that's enough of me.
I love it. All right, Kate, we can hear you now too. So build on Sharon's points. These are great. What are you all doing?
I think what comes to my mind is that you can just pull one lever, right? So I think it's great. We're doing webinars too, right? And we're doing bite-sized pieces that build on each other. But we're also looking at our talent management practices, and are we asking coaching style questions, right? If we're asking people to coach and to show up more like a coach, what does that look like in all of the processes that people have to do? How are we setting up our performance process? Are we setting it up to be punitive and measure and turn you into a math problem? Or are we setting up our performance process to look at the impact that you've had and how you've grown and how you've developed and what your plan is for is it future focused? So I think it's like you chip away at it from a bunch of different directions, if that makes sense, right? There's, the micro learnings. There's also how do you get really intentional about your language and build that into your processes, build that into how you're talking about learning, build that into how you're talking about the role as a leader, build that into how you're recruiting and posting jobs, right? I think it's not one thing. I think it's all the things and being consistent. I don't know. That's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, I love that, Kate, and I'd love to build on that with the rest of the group. Could even just, we have a few minutes left, but I know we all love walking away hearing about tools in each other's toolkits. So, no pressure, but, Sean, Anna, anyone else we haven't heard from, or, anyone on the phone, what else are you seeing in the talent management space or that you're doing that in some ways this crisis has given you an opportunity to lean into? And, we heard from the earlier panelists, like, okay, it's a time to reinvent some of their performance processes, get it more agile, move to greater continuous listening on the survey conversational side, promote sooner, return ships. I'd actually never heard that term before. So one more tool for my toolkit. But what other things are y'all trying out there to just lean into the moment? Sean.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. I just wanted to say, like, I've been listening, and I appreciate like all the value everybody's adding. And I can't say nothing has resonated, more than the other, but, it was something that Debbie was talking about, and it kind of, what she was talking about is kind of like is the intersection of like all the value that everybody else is adding. She was talking about like the roles of leadership. And I was just thinking about like, the work I do within diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just a lot of people I know that do work around whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, executive leadership coaching, or culture changing. And to me, it just all comes down to leadership. And the problem with trying to cultivate or implement strategies when it comes to culture and revenge, especially in this, COVID-19 remote workspace, is that basically how, leadership has been traditionally looked at, whether you're talking about, whether a male or a female, a man, when you're talking about gender. So what I'm trying to say, I'm kind of rambling because I know I'm under pressure. I'm on the clock and I'm trying to.
I put you on pressure. Sorry, Sean. No, this is good.
Respond to what everybody's saying, but no, it's just, so I'll just spit it out. What exactly is on my mind. When it comes to leadership, when you look at, the patriarchal system and the society that we live in, so the problem with trying to implement all these other strategies and mechanisms within culture is that, so on one hand, you want your leader to be more, it starts with leadership from the top down. So you want your leader to be more empathetic, to understand the needs of his employees, especially, or her employees, especially, in this environment we're currently living in when people are dealing with all types of things, but the problem is how male leadership and female leadership is looked at. If a man a lot of times comes across as too empathetic, or what's deemed as too empathetic, or too emotional, then we're going to question his leadership. Like, what's wrong with this guy? And then if it's a woman, 9 times out of 10, she's not going to even make it into that position if she exhibits too many of those type of qualities or characteristics. So I think we need to start there, because trying to implement things within culture, period, without looking at those things first, like it's not going to stick because it starts with leadership. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Well, and Sean, I think you may get the last, or maybe we give Mary the last word. You came off mute too, but I was going to say that's a great way to kind of end us. And I think what we're all saying is this is a macro existential moment, and it's like, let's lean into it. Let's not waste it. And if it means deconstructing some things that never should have been there, this is the time. So Mary, you are off mute. So I want to give you last word if you want it, and then we'll head back to
Yeah, I'll do 30 seconds. So I think Sharon and Sean are both touching on something to me that the research supports in two ways. On the industry side, even research that was 12 months old that was coming out of Deloitte, EY, Conference Board, pick your research organization. They all pointed to that there was a gap, a disconnect between how the frontline worker perceived their life in COVID and how senior leadership perceived it. And I think some of that is still persisting. That power distance that can happen in organizations. I definitely think it, and if you have an intellectual conversation with people, they get it, but somehow it still hasn't quite hit home in the same way in the senior ranks. So that's my first observation. Second is on a social science research perspective. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the single greatest influence on what's considered normative social behavior in an organization is how leaders behave. You can talk whatever talk all you want all day long, but how the leaders behave is what everyone else observes, and they take that on as the social norm for the organization and adapt their own goal setting mindset to reflect what they see senior leaders doing. So, we brought it up kind of earlier in the gig. It's a moment to help people leaders see their opportunity as bigger than just managing the numbers. And it's not a substitute. Believe me, I live in the most analytical place I've ever lived in my life from a work perspective, but it's a yes and. They have to, the business leader has to be true to the financials. That's what they're paid to deliver. And there is a new job that they have. It's always been there, but now it's amplified, which is creating an employment experience for the people whom you lead that help you enable those numbers.
I love this. Well, thank you all so much. I'm inspired by this. We're in a huge moment, I think is what we've decided, and we're at the center of it in talent management. So with that, go out and be part of the moment. Right?